Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. I do have one quick favor before we get to the video that you came here for, and that is very simply this. You see that little red subscribe button below this video? Go ahead, smash that subscribe button. It really does help me. It really does help this channel grow and my audience grow. So go ahead and hit that red subscribe button. And now, here is the video that you came here for. All right, everybody, I'm back. Good to be back. Good to be back. Thank you again to our partners at DraftKings and the DraftKings Sportsbook. Great promo for tonight's game. If you are in a state with legalized sports betting, first-time users, bet $5 on either team to win the game. $200 in free cash. It doesn't get any better than that. Let's get back to the game, though, and let's talk about the Alabama perspective. And let's talk about what is at stake for Alabama today. And what I will tell you is this segment, I promise to be shorter than the last one that I did on Georgia. And the reason why is simple. For Georgia, the conversation is much more interesting on both perspectives. If Georgia wins tonight, then it means this. But if Georgia loses tonight, it means that. With Alabama, it isn't that complicated, though. With Alabama, if Alabama were to lose, I think we all kind of have an understanding, Nick Saban's still the greatest of our generation. I would argue the greatest of all time. I don't think anybody is going to wake up on Tuesday morning and make the argument, Nick Saban's over the hill, Nick Saban's overrated, Nick Saban's this, Nick Saban's that. No. Great game, great team, great program, greatest coach of all time. There really isn't all that much at stake if Nick Saban were to lose this game. But if Nick Saban were to win this game, if Nick Saban were to win his 8th national championship, 7th at Alabama, I would argue that this is the single greatest season of Nick Saban's career, that he has done the single greatest coaching job of Nick Saban's career. Not saying it's his best team, not saying it's his most dominant team, not even saying it's his most talented team, but I would argue this is the best coaching job of Nick Saban's career. And there are two definitive reasons why, and the first one let's get into. It's kind of the 30,000-foot view of where college football is right now, this second in 2022. And I've talked about it before, but let me reiterate it here because I think it's so important it's worth mentioning. Every single rule that is currently in place in college football and every single trend and everything going on in the sport is actually being put in place and should be, in theory, limiting a program like Alabama, limiting a dynasty in the 2020s into the 2021, 2022 timeframe. Every single thing that is going on in college football right now really is kind of in place where we really shouldn't have a program like Alabama that is awesome every single year, great every single year, unbeatable every single year, and basically came into the college football forefront in 2008 and has not taken a step back yet. Because think about it. Think about everything that is going on in college football right now and think about how it impacts the program. First of all, I know this has changed a little bit over the last year or so, but there are scholarship limits. And again, it was 25. It's now, up to 32 because of the transfer portal stuff, but you got to lose guys to gain guys. But the point I'm trying to make is this, is that one, Nick Saban is coaching in the scholarship limit era. This isn't 100 years ago where you could bring in as many guys as you want. This isn't the 80s and early 90s where you had 35 scholarships and you could have over 100 guys on scholarships and you could stack player on player on player on player. This era, again, I know it's changed over the last year or so, but 25 per class, it's what we call a hard cap. Can't bring in more than that. You lose guys. Too bad. So sad. Move on. Secondly, this is the transfer portal era. This is an era where the last 3, 4, 5 years, guys are not waiting. Guys are not sitting behind. Guys are not coming to a place like Alabama, although Alabama may be the exception, and saying, I want to wait until year 4 to step on the field. I want to sit behind multiple NFL guys at my position, learn, get better every day in practice, and I'm willing to wait 3 years to get on the field. Now, Alabama, it's a little bit different. Alabama this year, they have a guy like Brian Robinson, their starting running back, who sat behind Najee Harris, who sat behind Damian Harris. But for the most part, that's not happening other places. Biggest problem with Clemson right now, they can't keep their backups. They have no depth because guys are coming into the program, they're not playing, and they're bouncing. Ohio State has had a few transfers this offseason. Oklahoma has dealt with it. USC has certainly dealt with it. You go on and on down the list. Everybody is losing transfers. Nick Saban has figured out a way where it doesn't affect his program. 3, and I've talked about this before, but again, everybody has the same resources. You want to know what happened about 30, 35 years ago that allowed Nebraska to become a great college football program, that allowed other programs to be a great college football program, they had access to stuff that nobody else did. First of all, the reason that Nebraska, Oklahoma, Miami, Penn State, one or two other programs were great in the early, 80s, 90s, 2000s, is because they were the only ones on TV. There was one national TV game a week, two national TV games a week, whatever it was. Nobody else was on TV. And so if you wanted to be on TV, if you wanted to play at the highest level, you wanted to compete at the highest level, you had to go to 1, 2, 3 schools. Nebraska, part of the reason, and I've talked about this before, I know I've written about it, part of the reason that Nebraska was able to elevate itself as a football program in the 70s, 80s, 90s, they were just ahead of the trends on everything that had to do with player development, player, physiology, whatever. You can look this up. They were the first school with a full-time strength and conditioning coach, a coach who was dedicated strictly to strength and conditioning. They were the first school that had a full-time nutritionist. I believe they were the first school to have more than one full-time strength and conditioning coach. And so I bring it up because because of money, because they were on TV, because they had more resources than everybody else, they were able to do stuff that nobody else did. And that's not a knock on Nebraska. I'm not saying they don't deserve what they got in the early 2000s or early 90s when they won three championships in 4 years. But what I am saying is Alabama is currently in the era where everyone has access to everything, okay? There is so much money in this sport that in Alabama, a Florida, a Georgia, an Ohio State, a Michigan, they can't just outspend everybody, okay? Think about where we are in college football right now, where Michigan State just paid $9.5 million a year to a coach with 18 career wins. 9.5 a year, 95 guaranteed, 18 career wins. How about a sport where Brian Kelly can leave Notre Dame because he has almost $100 million guaranteed at LSU? A sport where Purdue is paying its football coach $5-6 million a year. Minnesota is paying a 7-8 win football coach $6-7 million a year. Penn State gave James Franklin $75 million in extension money off of a 7-6 season. That is the world we live in. You can't just outspend everybody. You can't out-whatever everybody. And I would take it a step further. It's trickled down not just to the head coaches, but to the entire support staff as well. It used to be Nick Saban had this crazy staff with all these analysts and all of this and all of that. Well, guess what? You know who else has 1 million analysts now? Ohio State. Ohio State, when they started struggling this year, they actually took their defensive coordinator off play calling duties. They made him a walk-around defensive coordinator, and they put more on the analysts to get the team ready to actually play on Saturdays. And that's not just at Ohio State. That's not just at USC. That's not just at Oklahoma. Think about all the trickle-down. Think about the fact that right now in college football, Georgia has a former Alabama assistant that is basically putting in the Alabama blueprint in Athens. That Miami has a former Alabama assistant putting the Alabama blueprint in at Miami. That Florida, that Texas with Steve Sarkisian, that Lane Kiffin at Ole Miss, that Maryland, all these schools are trying to do what Nick Saban does. And he's the only one doing it. Jimbo Fisher, Texas A&M. And he's the only one. And he's still beating all of them. Except, of course, for Jimbo Fisher this year. But you get the point. And I think this is a huge part that we need to appreciate about Nick Saban. He's doing this in an era with all these extra games, with all these extra landmines, where it would be so easy to just lose a game here, cost yourself here, cost yourself there. Think about it. Think about the fact that as recently as 20 years ago, 2001 Miami Hurricanes, some say the greatest team in college football history. I would argue they are. They won the national championship. They went 12-0. 11 regular season games, no conference championship, one bowl game that served as a national championship game, okay? Now think about what Alabama is doing in the college football playoff era. 12 regular season games. And you better play a big one to start the year. This year, Alabama played Miami. In the past, they've played Michigan, Wisconsin, West Virginia, whatever. Go through a full 8-game SEC schedule. Then you have an SEC championship game. Then you have 2 college football playoff games, 15 games in most seasons. And he's still winning, and he's still beating everybody else. It is incredible. Every single thing that has been put in place is supposed to be stopping one team from elevating that much higher than the sport. Yet here we are. Here we are with Nick Saban competing for another national championship. But what I would say is that doesn't fully explain why this would be his greatest season ever. I still think he is doing it in an era where it is tougher to do it than ever before. But that doesn't explain why 2021 going into 2022 will go down as his greatest season ever if he wins a national championship. And that reason why is simple. This was not the team that Nick Saban was supposed to do this with. And I understand it's Alabama and every year they're going to be in the mix. But think about every single thing that they lost off last year's national championship team. They lose a starting quarterback in Mac Jones that is now going to the playoffs for the New England Patriots. They lose Najee Harris, a first-round running back for the Pittsburgh Steelers. They lose Devontae Smith, the Heisman Trophy winner, who, if I'm not mistaken, just set a NFL record for receptions as a first-year wide receiver. They lose Jalen Waddle, top 10 pick. They lose their starting left tackle. They lose several key players on defense. And so when I look at this team compared to all others, in the playoff era, with the extra game, with all the extra things that come with it, with the fact that now Ohio State, Georgia, Clemson, USC, Oklahoma, whoever, Texas, can compete with you financially. They're doing it in a year where they've lost as much talent to the NFL as any program ever, and certainly any Nick Saban program ever. I mean, if you want to talk about his greatest coaching performances, I think you can obviously go back to 2009, his first national championship, where they win the national championship in his third year as the head coach. But here's the thing. That year, first of all, there was no college football playoff. There was only one college football, a BCS championship game. But two, they actually returned the core of most of the team from the year before. Yeah, the quarterback was gone, John Parker Wilson. Greg McElroy was in. But they returned Mark Ingram. They returned Julio Jones. They returned Rolando McClain on defense. They returned a bunch of guys on So that one I don't think you can say is definitively more impressive than this one if Nick Saban were to win. I don't think you can say any other ones were either. Because after that, he's got it rolling. After that, the process is in place. After that, you have veterans. A.J. McCarron, you have this, you have this, you have this. This year, you lose 6 first-round picks, including a starting quarterback, including the 2 top wide receivers arguably in college football. You lose your offensive coordinator to Texas. He takes most of his staff with you. And this is what you're left with. First-year coordinator, first-year quarterback who has never played meaningful snaps at Alabama, and a bunch of skill position players that haven't played, including a wide receiver that didn't get there till the spring. And so to me, I will argue to my death, if Nick Saban were to win this national championship, it would go down as the greatest championship of his career and the greatest season of his career if he wins on Monday night.